I'm Betty Swan, and welcome to our show, Wisdom in the Night, where you get help for those tough decisions in your life. Tonight I have a great guest. He's an author, a broadcaster, and a president of a media company. Welcome, Joe Battaglia.
Thanks, Betty. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's just great. I want to hear all about you. I know that you've done a lot with your life because I've heard a lot about you, but I'm eager to know you.
Well, thank you.
Tell me all about yourself. Tell me how you, just give me your background.
Okay. Well, born here in New Jersey, first generation. My parents were born in Italy, came here.
What part of Italy?
In Calabria, the southern part of Italy.
Down at the bottom. Okay.
Down at the way at the bottom, you can actually see the sea from the instep.
Okay.
Where they are from, a little town called Satriano.
Okay.
Right there, and I had the pleasure of going back there to see my cousins who are still alive. Took my daughter when she was doing her study abroad in Florence, took the train ride all the way down, and it was just wonderful to see them and see the background and the roots, and it was just fantastic.
Nothing like it, is it? Seeing your roots.
Right, and so we grew up in a little town just outside of New York called Totowa, and all they did was transplant what they had there over here. So we had a large piece of land, most of it my grandfather gardened. My grandparents on my father's side lived with us. So it was a very nuclear Italian family. My mom was an amazing cook, almost legendary in our town. My grandfather...
Now that's saying a lot for an Italian town because a lot of those women are great cooks.
A lot of them, but she was extraordinarily great.
Wow.
And we grew a lot of what we ate. We canned our tomato sauce because we grew so many tomato plants, like 100 plants we would have.
Good night.
The garden was about 10,000 square feet.
Oh, my gosh.
And my grandfather initially did it all by hand, which is what he was used to. Mm-hmm. So there was the word power in our family was not used. There was no power or anything. So he built the chicken coop, he built the wine cellar, he built the front porch, the back porch, the retaining walls, and the grapevine under which we had a lot of our summer meals where it was just, it was like an Italian Mayberry for us right there growing up.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, so it was really wonderful.
Now that's why New Jersey is called the Garden State.
Yes, it does have a lot of gardens, and to those who may not be familiar with that, other than the Turnpike in that area, but there's a lot of great places in New Jersey, and so we had just a lot of fun. I had to go to college to find out that people didn't like their families.
What an amazing thing.
I had a great family life growing up. My mom was, like I said, the saintliest person I've ever known. My dad was a shoemaker, so he actually made shoes by hand for people who had deformed feet. So foot doctors would send him the individuals, and then he would take measurements and create the lasts, and he would do that in the basement in the little place he had set up. And so he was like Geppetto down there.
As long as you weren't Pinocchio.
Well, no, I was. I had nothing to do with that. So, yeah, it was kind of fun, and it was a wonderful childhood. And so my brother and I grew up under those conditions, and that's how we grew up. And then,
Did you go to college for media?
Yes, I was a journalism major at Boston University. So I went from 1968 to 1972, which was in the middle of all the craziness on the college campuses back then. So I got to see that firsthand. And it was in college at Boston U that I actually became a Christ follower.
How'd that happen?
Through Campus Crusade for Christ and their ministry.
Yeah, really, really. And so they were active?
They were active. That was their first year. And I met the gentleman who had started the campus ministry for Crusade.
Bill Bright, or?
Well, I met Bill later on, but it was another gentleman who started it there at Boston. Bill at this time was certainly back in California at Arrowhead and leading the group. And so it just became the most natural thing to do at the time because I always thought I was a, quote, good person, right? I had always gone to church.
Were you Catholic?
Oh, yes, of course. If you're an Italian kid from North Jersey, you're Catholic.
Okay.
And so when they approached me with knowing Jesus personally, right, which is the essence of becoming a Christ follower, not necessarily a religious person, because we
Now,
know
maybe you
the
might
distinction.
explain that,
Yeah.
because I know there's a lot of Catholics that are totally understand who Jesus is
Sure.
and all that he did, and yet a lot of times they feel like they have missed out on that personal relationship. Did you feel like you were missing out on that?
No, because I thought I knew what that meant, but I really didn't. You see, the reality is that whatever label we affix to ourselves, religiously, Catholic, Protestant, non-something, the reality is that neither one assures us that we are actually following Christ until we actually decide to follow Christ. And
So what does that mean to follow Christ?
well, it simply means to relax in his presence and enable him to be the model for us, to accept that he was, and to then take what he was and who he said he was and what he said he did for us and say, yes, I believe that. I confess that with my mouth. I believe that in my heart. And then begin to do the things that he did.
So that would be a Christ follower, is believing who he is,
Right.
what he came for, and so doing that.
And accepting
but
that.
then following his teachings, or
Well, you have to follow how he lived and what he asked us to do. Because if I follow anything, I'm only following it if I adhere to the thing that says I should be doing when I'm following.
right.
If I'm not, then am I following? Or am I going through motions? And so I was confronted at a point in time in my life there where even though I thought I was a good person, I had always done well in school. I had, done well in sports, studies, anything I wanted to accomplish as a young man or as a kid, I could, So I had this real good confidence in my abilities because I knew that my parents loved me. I had friends that loved me. I was told that God loves me. So I had a very secure, confident upbringing to believe in the things that I wanted to do. But I understood that when this gentleman began to talk to me about the distinction between thinking that you're a believer in Jesus and how do you know for sure that you're a believer in Jesus? I said, well, no, I really can't say for sure. I'm just following a lot of the things that I've been told. But I've never really personally said yes to who he was and then to allow him to mold and shape my life, because the idea is to allow him, through the power of the Holy Spirit who indwells us, to give us the power. See, the wonderful news about the Christian life is that we can't live it.
I know, nobody can. It's
No.
impossible.
See, to me, that is the most freeing thing, to know that that it is impossible
So you
for
don't
me.
have to do it yourself.
Right. And neither does God want you to do it yourself. So to me, that's really great news, because I can't do it in and of my own power, even though I have my own power. It still can't achieve and accomplish the things that Jesus wants of us in our lives, and to have the kind of Spirit-led life that enables us to overcome circumstances, to not be drowned in the things that seek to assault us every day, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. And it became a fun experience to get quiet and come to a conclusion in my junior year there at college that what I was doing was not being true to who Jesus was. So I made a very simple decision that I would do that. So for me, and it's so different for so many people, right? It was a very logical decision because my life was really good. I wasn't doing any drugs at the
And
time.
you're a logical person.
Yes, that's the way I think. I'm a journalist, and I look for facts. I look to synthesize information so that it can be condensed into the way it's best understood. And that's the way I approach things. So to me, becoming a Christ follower was the logical extension of what I really knew to be true.
It's so interesting how each person comes to the Lord, and that when people talk about, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
It really is personal. And like
Yes.
what works for you might not work for someone else, and yet
Right.
there are people watching you right now that are thinking, you know what, that really makes sense. That's
Yeah.
the first time I've ever heard anyone say it that way, and it makes sense.
Well, it does make sense because God orders the universe in a way that makes sense. And so not only do we look at him, we can look around us and see that the universe has order to it. Often,
And that appealed to you.
That
Well,
appealed
now,
to
how
me.
did you get into what you're doing now, where
Yeah.
you're an author, you work in movies some way, you promoting movies? What all do you do? I know you had that radio show, don't you?
Yeah, keep
Tell
the
about
faith.
that. How'd you get into that?
Everything is a long story. So let's try to synthesize some of this
Okay.
because there's a lot,
Okay.
to all this. I get out of college. I'm a journalist. I come back to the New York area and I start a magazine for the New York Christian community. And it was to help bring people together because I saw there were many disparate parts, not really knowing about the body, knowing about themselves. So I create this magazine in 1973. A year later, WWDJ Radio, which was my favorite rock station in the North Jersey, New York area, switches from being a rock station to a gospel station. But nobody there was a believer. They did it because it seemed like a good, logical business decision, right? And so I did a story on the switch, brought it back to the general manager. He bought me lunch and asked me if I would be their token Christian salesperson, really. Again, to make a long story short, after praying about it, I decided, well, this could be really cool. I had never been involved in broadcasting and radio. I had done some television while in college, but mainly, I'm a journalist. And so that's how my career starts in broadcasting. So I was 24. And then I get ensconced in this burgeoning and very nascent stage of contemporary Christian music. So I was at the beginning of all that. Went to Nashville, found out about that, began to go to these events, both in Washington with the National Religious Broadcasters and in Nashville with the Gospel Music Association. Got on the board of the Gospel Music Association. I was the first contemporary person, if you want to call it that, to be elected to the board.
Contemporary music.
Yeah. Did that for 20 years, was chairman for a couple. That's when we really began to work the Dove Awards and televise them nationally, and which is the Christian version of the Grammy. All the time kind of ascending the broadcast ranks from salesperson to sales manager, general sales manager to general manager. That's how I got into the broadcast thing and enjoyed that
Now,
immensely.
you have this radio show every day?
Well, the radio show that you're alluding to is I'm a executive producer of Keep the Faith, which is the #1 faith-based radio show in the country with 2 million weekly cum, like 600,000 average quarter hour, which is amazing. So we're on over 300 affiliates, and it's music and strong features that are compelling, telling stories to make encouragement contagious, as we say. So my partners and I do that. That's one thing here. And then I have my company, Renaissance, which is a media company that is an agency where we place media time, specifically radio, and even more specifically, mostly Christian radio. And this is my 25th anniversary of having my company, where we represent Dr. Steve Brown and his daily radio show called Key Life. We represent Prison Fellowship and do their radio. And then a lot of what I do is what you referred to on the movie side, is that almost 15 years ago, I began getting involved in again, the nascent stages of the early faith-based movie thing. And,
It's really progressed, hasn't it?
it's exploded, particularly over the last 5 years. So I've been involved in the highest grossing faith-based movies that have been out there, starting from The Passion to, say, Soul Surfer or
Just
War
name
Room.
some of those.
Well, of course, it was, from The Passion to Soul Surfer, everything that the Kendrick brothers have done, from Facing the Giants to Fireproof to Courageous to War Room, everything Sony has done, because I'm retained by them. So it would be Heaven is for Real, When the Game Stands Tall.
And do you see Christian movies growing more and more influential in the movie world, or taking a bigger percentage of maybe the marketing than it ever has?
Well, it's certainly growing wonderfully. Some of the movies that have come out recently are just amazing examples.
Like War Room.
Like War Room was amazing. Miracles from Heaven with Jennifer Garner that we worked on, which was an amazing movie.
I
Risen.
saw that.
Risen was an amazing movie with Joe Fiennes. We just worked on, The Case for Christ, Lee Strobel's story, a wonderful movie. We have another 4 or 5 coming this year.
Really?
yeah.
That many?
Well, we have a couple one-night events with Fathom Entertainment, Jonah on stage, which is Sight and Sound in Lancaster, their presentation. We have a documentary with CBN later in May called In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, which is about the Six-Day War and the retaking of Jerusalem. We just finished Facing Darkness with Samaritan's Purse, about the Ebola crisis that happened and how they faced that.
Africa.
Yeah, so there's some wonderful movies that are out there. We've got a bunch for next year as well. So this is a lot of what I do. And then I work with Mark Burnett and Roma Downey on a lot of their movies and TV things. And so they're just wonderful people.
I've only heard really nice things about them.
You only
from a
will.
lot of different people.
Yeah, I mean, they are wonderful people, and she is about as sweet and real as they come.
Touched by an angel.
Well, yes, I love Roma. Her spirit is just delightful. And so my job, I see it often as an Aaron. My job is to help whoever is the Moses to keep their arms raised so that God can part the Red Sea that he has given them.
Now, right there, see, I was going to ask you what you think your main purpose is from God.
Yeah.
And you just crystallized it.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I'm about. The other side of me, which is the author side, I've done 3 books now. My 4th is coming out in 2 weeks. And so I love to write, and I'm beginning to do that more now that I have time, and I feel a calling to do that. So my first one I did like 20 years ago, A New Suit for Lazarus for Thomas Nelson.
That's an interesting
Yeah.
title.
Well, it's about how...
Grave clothes versus back to regular clothes
Well,
again.
it's the way Jesus calls each of us out of the grave and gives us a new identity and a new look.
Yeah.
And so, and then the politically incorrect Jesus, which is still 2 years ago, I
Now, what's
published
that all about?
As a broadcaster, and more importantly, as a communicator, I became really disappointed with the whole politically correct agenda that few people understand the basis for that and the spirit that is behind that. I firmly believe that the spirit we bring into the work we do is the same spirit which is received at the other end by everyone who consumes it.
Wow.
And so that is why art, and I've been involved in music and all kinds of forms of communication. That's why that is so powerful, because there's a spirit that goes into anything I produce as an artist and as a writer. And people say, explain that. And I say, think of it this way. And I go back to my mom's tomato sauce, okay? It was so delicious sometimes. I would just sit there and close my eyes and just bathe in the beauty of the tastes, right? So I try to make the same thing, right? Or somebody else says, well, here's the recipe. Doesn't come out the same. I firmly believe the reason that happens is that my mother and others who feel similarly about their product, she, in a kind of way that the universe works, the love that she had for the family who was to receive this and be the beneficiary of the art that she created, that spirit was the extra ingredient that we cannot replicate and which is received at the other end.
Love is a spirit in a way, isn't
Yes.
it? And it communicates all kinds of ways, even in tomato sauce.
Yes. So that's kind of a simple way to understand what that means. And so when you look at the start of how politically correct systems developed in 19th century Europe to offset the oppression that people had under the ruling class at the time, which I totally understand, they had to create an us versus them mentality.
And that's where that comes from.
See, it comes from that spirit of us versus them and saying things that you then define as the wrong things to say,
And
right?
we've been through
And
that
so,
so
yeah,
much
and so
recently.
that spirit was brought to America in the 60s, which I went through that time. And it has grown into the current mindset where we are asked to believe in things that aren't true and to assent to things that we don't even believe in. And so you no longer have,
And ostracized if you do.
yeah, and
other things.
which is totally antithetical to what really we are about as a country, right?
Yeah, because as a country, we're known for embracing people.
We have to embrace those who are different because, and those with different ideologies and positions. But today we see the very opposite happening in this, and this is a result of that spirit coming into this country. And that's what I believe now. I'm just saying this isn't,
Something you're
just
thinking.
my thoughts. And so us versus them is the spirit that
Yes.
embodies.
Well,
And so
let me
what does
ask
that
you
look
something.
like?
Well,
Yeah.
let's go into something else. I have something else I want to ask you because
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you're doing a lot with your life and have done a lot in so many different areas. I'd like to know what kind of challenges
Mm-hmm.
have you encountered? And in the time we have left, I'd like to know what kind of challenges you've encountered. And then, as you were telling me before we started the show, you believe God has said your greatest days are still ahead.
Sure.
And I'd like for you to address people who are watching this, not only with challenges, but keep the vision that age does not stop you. You could begin actually moving into your greatest work right now. Could
Yeah.
you kind of address that?
Sure. Let me try to define that because there's a
Okay.
lot there to unpack.
All right.
Okay. Challenge is part of growth. And so God allows challenges in our lives in order to help us understand our dependence, not our independence, which is kind of the American mindset. And so the challenges for me have been to start things that people didn't think were either possible or to believe in. But let me tell you the greatest challenge, which has been my wife's health. My wife has MS and cannot walk right now, but has been healthy. Then she was, and we found a doctor who has put that to a halt 12 years ago, a wonderful doctor in Long Island. So she has not had any further exacerbations in 12 years. That's a whole nother discussion and program as to how easy it is to help someone in that condition. And so the challenge has been, how do I see that? And this is one of the chapters in my book about the the way in which I handle challenges like that, right? And so that has been the greatest challenge because it could create in me a desire to not do things, a desire to say, God, why this? And so But we never talk about that as a challenge. We always talk about it as here's an opportunity to see how we're going to do these things.
It's not like you're not going to have them. It's what you do with them. And
Sure.
you're saying you don't let it stop you. You do everything you can to solve the issue, like this wonderful help you've gotten for your wife. But talk to me a little bit about where you're headed next. I mean, like if I said to you, Joe, where do you see yourself 10
Sure.
years from now? You would be, what, 70, what?
Well, 10 years from now, I'd be 77.
All right. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm 70. I've already done everything. I'm too old. And what would you say?
I would say this, that the reason God puts us here is to accomplish His will, not ours. And so if you believe that you have a calling, and I see what I've been involved in all these years, it's been like 43 years now doing the stuff I do, He is now showing me that there's so much more on the movie side, on the writing side, that I have finally come to a position of understanding so that I am qualified to write something that I feel might benefit someone. You see, age merely makes you better in order to understand the things you couldn't understand when you were younger. Mm-hmm. And so instead of wrapping our lives up at a certain age, that is when God says, I may have to unfold you so that you can allow what I have given to you in all this wisdom now to be applied.
And you're healthy. And
yes.
that's I can tell that about you. Your mind's still very active.
Yes, well, I try.
Yeah,
right.
Well, I can tell. Well, I want to talk to all of you that are listening. Do you realize that we live in such an unusual time in America? There are teenagers that are making fortunes, coming up with technological ideas. There are older people that in other times would be sitting by the road saying, that's it. And instead, they're taking off on new adventures, just like what you're hearing Joe talk about tonight. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I guess you can tell it wasn't an accident that you turned on the TV tonight and listened to him. I hope you receive some wisdom and that you have a great rest of the night, whether you're going to sleep or going to work, or you're just going to be thinking about what he said. So I'll see you next time. Bye.